Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call this City Council special meeting for Tuesday, August 20th, 2019 to order. Madam City Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Mayor Christy Malchow.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Karen Moran.
Present.
Councilmember Tom Hornish. Councilmember Jason Ritchie.
Present.
Councilmember Chris Ross.
Present.
Councilmember Pamela Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Ramiro Valderrama.
Present.
Okay.
And Tom Hornish is on.
Oh, okay.
Great.
All right, so Madam City Clerk, we do have a quorum. Deputy Mayor Moran, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Okay, we'll take that as a move in second since we had it moved twice. Any questions? Nope. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, by a vote of 6-1, the motion or the agenda is approved. So our first order of business is a discussion, the city's traffic model, including the manner in which the adopted 6-year transportation improvement plan is incorporated into the traffic model for purposes of determining traffic concurrency. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council, and good evening, everybody. With that, I will turn it over to staff, and we'll start with Cheryl Paston.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, Mr. City Manager. Cheryl Paston, Acting Public Works Director. To my left is Andrew Zagers, the City Engineer. To my immediate right is Stephen Chen, who's our Traffic Engineering Manager. And then on down the line is David Pyle, who's our Acting Community Development Director. And then I am Kelly Hildy. I am so sorry, the planning manager. So, and we're trying to get Josh Anderson on the phone. I've just texted him. I've called him. I think he's still trying. Hey, Josh.
Cheryl, I am on.
Josh.
Oh, he's there.
Josh, are you on the phone?
Josh is here.
Got him.
Did he say yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
He did say yes. Okay.
Yes.
So hopefully we can coordinate everybody on the phone. I think it'll be a challenge for you, Mayor. Whatever we can do to help answer your questions, particularly with Josh on the phone.
Perfect.
Let us know what we can do to kind of help that along. I don't have a presentation. We are here to answer questions.
Great.
So with that, I'll hand it over back to you.
Great. And for the council members that we have on the phone, I did send you an email. If you want to get in the queue, if you have a question or comment, please text my city phone. And that email contains that phone number in case you don't have that readily handy. That's the only phone I have up the dais. Okay. There are questions from the council. Fire away. Okay.
Move to adjourn.
No, I have questions. I was just going to give everyone else an opportunity first. Does anyone on the phone have any questions?
I want to hear first if there's questions from the other.
Okay. Well, if nobody has their lights on, then I'll jump in. I'm going to try and reference some notes and questions that I have. And I've got a giant pile of papers in front of me that I'm going to reference as well while I ask a few questions. So Josh, and for those in the audience who don't know, Josh is from David Evans and Associates, and that is who has our model and does our modeling work for us, and the city does contract that service out. So I do have questions, Josh, about how we determine where vehicles go when we run a concurrency test. And I have several different ones that I've referenced at this point, and I want to ask the questions about how the city determines where they go and why, as they are leaving the city, that the trips seem to fall off as they go. And I assume then we're assuming those cars are then going into the neighborhoods. So if maybe you can kind of explain how the model works as far as determining where vehicle trips go when an application comes in, that might be helpful.
Sure. So the
traffic software that we use is Visum, VISUM. It has an assignment-based algorithm that when you tell the model that there are going to be new trips added for any kind of development, a trip out of the development has to end somewhere. And typically for residential trips in the morning, they're going to school destinations or office work type destinations. Some stop by retail or restaurants in the middle of that trip. But each one of these stops or starts is considered as a trip. So when you've got a residential trip that leaves the house going to a restaurant, the leaving the house is considered a trip, and then the destination at the restaurant is considered a trip. So when we talk about trips within the travel demand model, it's really trip beginnings or trip ends that we're referencing there.
Okay.
So within the travel demand model, we have many different land uses, retail, residential, office, just to name a few of those. And there are different parameters with trips coming from residential. A certain percentage will go to an office destination or a retail or a school. And that's all of those other uses within the city represent the other end of that trip.
Okay, so let me ask another clarifying question, because when I look at some of the maps that we have, there are road connections on the map that don't exist in reality, and so I wanted to cross-check that with you.
Mm-hmm. So there are the model that we are using, and I apologize, there are a few tests that came out recently where it does look like there are roadways in the model. Mm-hmm. Some of those roadways are closed to vehicular traffic in the model because we're trying to use this base of roadway networks for the existing model, the pipeline, and out into 2035. And it does show up as roadway links in some of those figures, where even though those roadway links are closed because they are not expected to be open by the time the 2025 pipeline analysis.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand that because I'm looking at two road connections right now, one of which is utilizing private roads. So that would not be open probably ever unless the city assumed it to be a public roadway. Actually, both of them are private, come to think of it. There's quite a few trips going in a very close proximity, and it doesn't make intuitive sense. I guess I'm trying to understand why we're sending trips so close in a vehicle to in an origination point, if that makes sense. So you use the terms origination and destination, correct? In your when you model. Why would someone get in a car and drive when the destination is so close?
Same reason you drive to Big Rock Park.
Not if there's sidewalks. And there are sidewalks here.
So in the travel demand model, the travel demand model only deals with vehicular trips.
Right.
There are assumptions beforehand.
Josh, we're having a hard time hearing you. Your voice is fading in and out. It sounds like you're moving away from the phone, maybe. It's harder to hear you when you
Is that better?
That's better, yes.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
There are trip reduction factors for bicycles and pedestrian trips, that small percentage of trips that are going to use bike or walk that are taken. Those reductions are taken before we model them in the travel demand model. So the travel demand model only deals with those vehicular trips. And there are, believe it or not, quite a few people who will get in their car to drive across, say, 228 or Sahali or it's Pine Lake just because their destination is across the street. They might never actually drive on one of those main arterials, but they will use their vehicle to cross those main arterials.
Okay, so my next question is relative to how the model determines where the cars go. Let's just assume the vehicles are going to leave the plateau. They're going to originate at a destination in Sammamish, and they're going to leave. When I look at different concurrency tests, we have some that take a more obvious path to get off the plateau. Like, let's just pretend I'm going to go to T-Mobile. I work at T-Mobile headquarters. I need to use I-90 to get there. I've got to get to the south end of the plateau. Some of the modeling doesn't give me a very intuitive way to go, and I used Google Maps, Apple Maps, and Waze Maps to try and give me the same pathway that the model is telling me I would go, that most of the cars would go, and it doesn't ever take me that way. So I'm trying to understand why the model is making that assumption.
Without knowing the specific one that you're looking at, I can't give you specifics on that, but I can say there are, so the travel demand model is based on an equilibrium assignment. So it assigns vehicles to the paths that have the shortest amount of travel time from origin to destination. So in some instances, there are going to be multiple routes that have within a second or two the same travel time. And in that instance, if it assigns 5 vehicles to one of those routes, then the time that it takes to make that specific route will jump up and be slightly above the other one. So then it'll assign a couple to route number 2 and back and forth as it hits equilibrium.
Okay. So I understand that when we look at a concurrency test and we see the numbers, it's net new trips. So it's not necessarily just the trips generated from the new development. It's assuming that background traffic may move somewhere else based on new trips that the development will create. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So then based on at least one of the concurrency tests that I've seen, I'm perplexed by the mechanism to which the trips go based on what you said, shortest time. So the shortest time would be routing through a neighborhood onto a 2-lane street and getting off the plateau to the south if I'm going to go to T-Mobile headquarters, and that's where my job is in the morning, versus taking 4 lanes, 228th down, which is the way that the 3 software that I use to kind of map my route if I were working at T-Mobile and I was leaving, City Hall, for example. It tells me to go away every single time, and Waze and Google allow you to time it. So I can say I'm leaving at 7:30, which is smack in the middle of our peak AM hour, and it tells me every single time that the shortest path, time-wise, is to go on the principal arterial. But what you're telling me is that the principal arterial is so full of traffic that the model is now assuming that those cars get off of our principal arterial and onto a collector street or neighborhood residential street in order to avoid our principal arterial. That's what I'm gathering from this, and that is not quite intuitive, and I guess that's where I'm stuck.
So I think a portion of that is correct. So one of the other things to look at is really where those trips are originating. So if the trips come out of a new development that's right on 228, the trips would likely head straight down 228. If they are to the west of 228, there's kind of a break-even point where the routes through the collectors might actually be faster than heading east out to 228 down and then back west. So it's that fine balancing, and the travel demand model doesn't have a human brain. It doesn't see. When drivers drive, they have a tendency to go to a higher classification road, the arterials. The travel demand model assigns it on more of a second by second basis. If it's 1 second faster to go through the collectors, it will assign traffic that way. This is pretty standard practice, especially as people start to use those navigation apps more often, have navigation in their cars, that type of thing. I've personally gone some very wacky routes through local streets that I didn't even know were routes because that's what Google Maps or Waze was telling me to do.
I agree. I mean, I've certainly done the same thing, which is why I used Waze, Google, and Apple Maps to try and mimic the path that I see traffic flows going, and I could not make it do that. And what I'm looking at is more than twice as many trips are taking the least intuitive that I couldn't make 3 mapping softwares make me go. And that's why I'm like, is there an error in the model that's making traffic move somewhere else? That's where I'm going. I don't know if you can speak to that, but I get what you're saying. 1 second difference, and it'll take you the other way. Those crowdsourcing apps all use that in order to get you to go the fastest way. But again, I can't make any of them make them do that. So it seems counterintuitive. I understand that it doesn't have a human brain, and then there's the practice that goes on in the model, but then there's the reality on the street, and they don't seem to marry up.
And that is entirely possible. Travel demand models are not necessarily built to get down to the micro level detail of, of the nth degree for each vehicle trip. They're intended to give you kind of a higher level, bigger picture look at or guess on what's going to happen 6 years from now. And that's the other thing to keep in mind. There are other developments in the city's model or other projects that are assumed within the TIP that are expected to come online between now and the year 2025. There's also the background growth from Issaquah, Redmond, all the other cities around through the entire region that's going to be hitting the Sammamish streets also between now and 2025. So while it might not be the fastest trip, the fastest route today, it's possible that there is enough background growth or other development expected within the city that it just ticks it over to where an alternate collector route might be the fastest by 2025.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. I'm just not sure that it makes a whole lot of sense to me. The other question I have is, as trips start to fan out, we have trips disappearing into the neighborhoods. And that is also counterintuitive when there's no place of business, because if we're talking about the AM peak commute, we're talking about 7 to 8 a.m. only. That's the only window of time we are looking at. It would be very odd for someone to leave their home and go into a neighborhood. All over. Nope, not if there's not a school there. So how do we account for the attrition of trips that are going off into neighborhoods where no businesses are going?
It would depend on the concurrency test. There is some residential to residential trip making pattern, but typically if there's a destination in the morning in a neighborhood or a residential area, those are trips coming from either schools or retail or restaurants. So there are people who will drop their kids off at school, have breakfast, and then head back home. Whether they work from home or stay-at-home parents or whatever they be, it's very possible that trips coming out of commercial-type developments will head into residential areas in the morning.
So then you're recapturing them on the destination in the AM peak as well as leaving their home and coming into there. Is that what you're saying? We definitely capture both sides of the trips. So if there's a
commercial development in the morning, we will have, say it's a grocery store. We'll have trips coming into the grocery store in the morning. We'll have trips leaving that grocery store in the morning. The trips that are coming into the grocery store are likely originating at a residential area in the morning, leaving the grocery store in the morning. They might also be heading to residential, because it's not typical that you'd stop by the grocery store and then have your groceries sit in the car while you're at work all day. Could happen. Like, some people have nice coolers.
So are you making, one more question here on assumptions in the model. If they're going to a place that is a dead end, are you reaccounting for those vehicles to come back out on the street? I can't make that math work. So it looks like once a vehicle leaves its residential area and goes somewhere, that it is staying there, that it is not being picked back up out on the roadway. Is that an assumption that if you go somewhere that in that AM peak hour, it's not getting back out on our system, on our roadway system?
In the demand model doesn't look at trip chaining as much. So when you do the trip generation calculation, say for a restaurant, or maybe a high turnover restaurant where you're only in the seat for half an hour, 40 minutes, that one person that arrives during the early portion of the morning peak could also be departing, but we don't map those trip change events. What we map is the number of trips coming into the restaurant and that we're expecting to come out of the restaurant. And it's likewise for each of the land uses within the model. We're not tracking multiple trips in that peak hour.
I get it. The restaurant thing I get in the PM peak when we're talking 4:45 to 5:45, but at 7 to 8 in the morning, the restaurant's a pretty unlikely scenario.
You could use the same type of conversation for schools. So a lot of the trips in the morning to schools, they are trip chained. People drop their kids off on the way to work. So it's the same type of thing. That trip is only stopping for a couple minutes at the school, but it counts as a destination trip and then an origin trip leaving the school.
Okay, wait, we cannot interrupt. Okay, so thank you for answering those questions. I will yield my platform here to my time to someone else. But when I look at the maps and where the trips go, they are really counterintuitive. We have not one net new single trip using the most obvious route off the plateau, and that is a little mind-blowing, I've got to admit. Okay, I have Councilmember Hornish.
Yes, thank you. And I'm going to try to questions to Josh, but I reserve rights to ask Cheryl some questions as well, but I will try not to take too much time or yield to somebody else as you just did. So Josh, following up on what you just said, you said you're talking about restaurant trips. So when you get an application for a residential application concurrency certificate, you're not looking at the restaurant trips. You're looking at just the incremental from that residential app. Is that correct?
We are, with each concurrency test, we are only analyzing the net new trips for that specific development, whatever it may be. And so,
all right. So if you get an application that has new dwelling units, this restaurant and people going to and from dead ends and residential, it has nothing to do with people going to school. It has only people that are coming from that new residential app and what the incremental is, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
All right. That's what I thought. Thank you. So it's still, I question too, then why do people leave a new residential dwelling unit to go to a dead end when they're not from there? That doesn't make sense. Very counterintuitive. I know it's an algorithm. When and how was that algorithm developed?
The algorithm was developed quite a while ago. I don't have specifics on it. I don't know the answer to that one.
Do you think things have maybe changed since then?
It is possible, absolutely. A lot of what we have done within the past, since 2016, was work to calibrate the city's travel demand model. We've calibrated it extremely well to the traffic counts. We have not calibrated it to origin and destination type of information. That is beyond what typical travel demand models will do, but it can be done if the council would like us to do so.
You know when it was last calibrated?
Last calibration was in 2017 and 18.
Hey, when you get a concurrency application, what assumptions are you to use? Who tells you what assumptions to use?
So what I see from my side is the city gets the concurrency application. If they have any questions regarding accuracy or anything like that, I'm sometimes consulted. Other times, what I am given is the land use, the number of dwelling units, square footage, and type of use. And I work with Stephen Chen and his crew to come up with and agree on a trip generation number. Those are sometimes provided by the applicant, other times not, depending on the development. And once the applicant, the city, and DEA are in agreement with the trip generation numbers, then those trip generation numbers and land use units, square footage, or number of dwelling units is what we plug into the model, along with the location of the proposed development.
Okay, so we'll have to ask staff how they typically do that then, and who decides what. Because I know you get the information and run the test, so I want to make that clear that we do understand that. Following up on that same line of thought, what Mayor Malchow just talked about with some of these roads that are not there yet, who tells you whether or not to assume that they will be there with 2025? Are they the ones on the tip? Are they ones that are expected? Are they ones that are funded? How do we know whether or not they're actually, how do you know that they're actually, you should assume that those are to be assumed to be there?
So when a new tip is adopted, we code the projects that have construction funding identified in the tip.
That's a different question. That's a different question I have, but I want to follow up with that. I'm talking about the dead-end roads that are currently dead-end, but you're saying the private roads that Mayor Malchow highlighted, but you're saying, well, we're going to assume that they're open and available for use. Not the tip.
The roadways that are open for use are the roadways that are included in the tip or roadways that are currently built.
So the ones that Mayor Malchow highlighted before that are currently dead end, those are on the tip to be opened up within the next 6 years. Is that what you're telling me?
That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the roadways that are currently open or look to have construction funding on the tip are included in the model. And if council finds a location that should not be open, then that is one that possibly could have slipped by us and the reviewers when we were updating the model the most recent time. So if you do find one of those, please let us know.
So let me make sure I understand that. So it's what Mayor Malchow said, that there are current dead-end roads that are not on the tip. We should let you know.
Yes, they're current dead-end roads. They're typically a dead-end road has some sort of use on that road, whether it be 2 or 3 residential units or it might be a dead end to a subdivision. Any of those dead end roads typically still have some amount of traffic on them. It is possible that we could have coded erroneously a dead end road or a driveway to a dead end road. If that is the case, please let us know.
But I'm still struggling with how a development that's not in that dead end road, why they would go there if there is no commercial or any reason for them to go there. That's what I don't understand about the algorithm.
And I think I've answered that one. If it's a residential development and there is just residential land use at the end of that dead end road, there is a very small increment of residential trips that will go to other residences, whether they be picking up other. Go ahead.
From the new development, this doesn't follow common sense.
Well, you could have a high school teenager that is picking up a friend on the way to school. You could have a home daycare in those residential areas where people will come and drop off 1, 2, 3 children at that home-based daycare. So there is, in reality, in the field, on the ground, there are residential to residential trips in the morning and in the evening.
And somebody built that into the algorithm. So if somebody else built an algorithm, it may or may not show the same thing, correct?
That is correct.
All right. Last question for Josh that I have is, who tells you what TIP projects to include? Do you include all the projects on the TIP or only a subset of the TIP projects?
I work with staff to identify the projects that look to have construction funding within the time frame of the TIP. And if they look like they will be have enough construction funding, then we add those into the model.
Okay, I will yield, but I do have questions for Cheryl to follow up along those same lines.
Councilmember Ross.
Thank you. Josh, you mentioned that the traffic model doesn't have a human brain.
Yes, sir.
But and you also added that most humans take the major arterial, which conflicts with the results. What factors do you program into your model that try to get you closer to human behavior, not computer behavior?
So typically the arterials, the higher classification roadways, the larger roadways will have a higher capacity that we're assuming in the model. They typically have higher speed limits. So there are roadways that we want vehicles to be pushed to, like 228, Issaquah Pine Lake, 244, those larger arterial roadways, and those are coded with higher capacities and typically higher speed limits than the collectors or the local roadways.
Okay, thanks, Josh, on that. I'm going to yield and delay questions for staff on some of my other questions.
Okay, actually, this is really loud. Okay, I'm going to keep it way back here. Josh, I do have one question for you, and that has to do with, again, it's when I saw the map, and it's the first time I've ever seen this, so it was kind of surprising to me. And that was when I saw the switch from the town center traffic, instead of it being on 228th, it being moved over to 212th. Now, keeping your last thought process going, which is it would normally be on the bigger road, which is your 4-lane with the higher speed, and with the fact that, 212th is Snake Hill with, roadway that many times is underwater. during rainy season. So I'm trying to understand, is there an assumption or something that was put in that would have created that shift over? Because that makes no sense to me that it would have taken it away from a clear arterial. So I don't know assumptions that would have gone in. I guess I'm looking for what assumptions would have gone in that would have created a shift.
We did not alter the city's concurrency model in any way other than to add the proposed developments that we're seeking concurrency into the model. There were no other tweaks that were made when this model was run. So if you're asking why those shifted,
all of a sudden would they have shifted from 228th to?
My response is they didn't shift. That is where those trips would have gone 2 years ago. 2 years from now, those trips would go down, would not be on 228. The shortest path within the travel demand model is to use the more local roadways. That hasn't changed within the last couple of years. It wouldn't change in the next couple of years unless we were altering the model specifically to make them move. It's the demand model is showing the fastest path. And without getting into specifics of specific developments, the further west you go, the more gravity there is to get down to the parkway to get off the plateau. The less likely trips are to go east to 228 to get off of the plateau. And that is across all developments across the board, not just specific to any one development.
Okay.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. One point I'd like to make is that if you're using, if you go into one of these apps, Waze, Google Maps, Apple Maps, right now, it's going to map according to the traffic patterns of the summer. So you probably will get a very different result than if you're looking out in a different kind of model. But Josh, just to clarify, while you said that you don't use a serial or a chaining of trips, it sounded to me like you are counting both trips when you have people who might be going from their home to a school, or say your home, from their home to Starbucks, and then from Starbucks back to their home, because you're counting that trip for that increase in the commercial space as well, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so just because you don't count it as a singular event doesn't mean that those trips aren't getting counted. If you have a commercial, an application for commercial development, then you would be counting, you would be adding trips from that commercial space to a neighborhood, correct? So again, if we use the Starbucks example, and I'm pretty sure that like 50% of our residents go to Starbucks in the morning on their way to work. So if we're adding someplace that's going to have something like a Starbucks or something like that, then those trips would get added, and that is what we might see if we're looking at a map where we see something originating in a commercial area and ending in a residential area, is that I went and got my morning coffee. Would that be accurate?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And the maps that the mayor is referring to would have had both residential and commercial applications in them. So that is probably why she's seeing destinations into neighborhoods. Because we were given.
I never heard a specific reference to a specific development, so I cannot confirm or deny.
Fair enough. I want to also circle back. You said that these models were calibrated in 2017 to validate the assumptions that we see. And can you, and I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, and I'm really sorry to put you on the spot. It's kind of unfair, but can you tell us what degree of accuracy these models have been calibrated to?
the nth degree. I do not have those numbers right in front. Actually, hold on. I'm pulling them up. I apologize. I'm working over a VPN connection right now, so
Totally
my computer is a
understood.
little.
I know this would have been better if we would have waited until next week when you could have been here in person. So sorry that we did not.
No problem. So I'm not sure how many people have taken statistics classes. I took my fair share of them, but the R squared is a goodness of fit measure, and the goodness of fit of your AM travel demand model is 99%. Another goodness of fit measure is real mean relative error, and we were down to 3% on the mean relative error. So all that is to say that the models are extremely well calibrated to the conditions that were on the ground when we collected counts in 2016.
Got it. And what's the industry average for this type of calibration? I would imagine it's much lower.
It is. I don't have that one off the top of my head, but it is much lower than that, yes.
Okay, so while there may be a random trip here or a random trip there, we have an extremely accurate traffic model. And I'll just throw out that as someone who always uses 212th or Snake Hill Road to get to Issaquah, it is absolutely a faster way if you're going down the hill.
Okay, let's not interrupt one another.
So I don't think that it is inaccurate. And Josh, I appreciate that you calling out that that's been the path that people would select because it is much faster. There are no stoplights. So I think that that's pretty reasonable. So that's all I've got. Thank you. Actually, while I have the floor, I just want to let folks know that I will have to leave at 5 o'clock, that my daughter had surgery yesterday afternoon, and that I asked for this meeting to not be scheduled today, that we could push out a couple of days or even till next week. And because I was not consulted when scheduling this meeting, I only found out about it on Facebook after it was publicly noticed, and I was told that the meeting would happen today and that if I couldn't make it, I should just not attend. So I will watch your public comments next week from the recording. I'm sorry that I will have to leave early.
Okay, I have, Josh, through the course of questions, I have a few more. You mentioned that the model was calibrated in 2017. What did you change in 2017 in that calibration?
There were a laundry list of things that we updated. We updated the volumes that we were trying to get the model to replicate. So the city collects intersection and roadway length volumes each year, and we went through and we updated those intersection and link volumes, targets that we were trying to get.
Can I ask you real quick? So you only have the 2017 traffic counts in there in the model?
Correct.
Okay.
The 2016 traffic counts.
Sorry, what was that? 2016?
The 2016. Yes, that's the last time the model was updated. It was with 2016 traffic counts. So we updated the traffic counts. We updated and cleaned up some of the geometrics within the model. So roadways that had turn restrictions or new connections put in that were not captured within a TIP, whether they be privately funded or I think that's the only other way they get built. So we updated the geometrics and we updated the volumes that we were to which we were calibrating. And then to get the travel demand model to match those volumes, we adjusted some of the trip generation characteristics to be specific for the city of Sammamish and not the national average.
Okay, so we're using 3-year-old traffic counts in there. Why aren't we using more updated traffic counts? I know it takes a while to process them after we gather them, but I already know that the 2018 traffic counts are all parsed out. So
it took quite a while for us to get approval of the currently calibrated travel demand model. Most jurisdictions and agencies don't update within every 4 or 5 years. Typically, they go 5 years. Some go even up to 10 years between updates. To do it more frequently is pretty cost prohibitive, typically.
okay,
Mayor,
yes.
Josh, maybe you can explain how do we keep the model up to date, that there's a difference between calibration and updating the model. Could you touch on that? Just, with adding all the approved concurrency certificates, those trips are all put into the model. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So while the model was last calibrated to counts, we have calibrated the model extremely well. So as development comes in with concurrency applications, each one of those developments is added into the model. So we have a running total of developments and trips that are expected, and they are all assumed in the pipeline model for concurrency purposes. As each development is each concurrency certificate is either expired or withdrawn, we will also remove those applications so that we're not overcounting trips. So the model kind of maintains itself, but there are the reason that you would update and recalibrate is because we're not tracking all of the concurrency applications for areas outside of the city. So the big driver for that update in recalibration and matching new counts is to account for development or additional regional travel through the city.
Okay, so let me just repeat that back so that I understand. You're using our 2016 traffic counts. You're adding in trips, but they're modeled trips, correct? Based on concurrency certificate that have been issued. You say, we're going to add X amount of trips to this roadway, and that's added onto the base, which is 2016. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're incorrectly modeling where the trips are going, you're inaccurately modeling. And the reason I say that or ask that question is because when I look at two different concurrency certificates that are in the same vicinity, the pattern of travel is very, very different, which is why I asked about how and what you did to calibrate the model. So again, back to the I work at T-Mobile scenario, in a different concurrency certificate, we're coming up 43rd. And what you're telling me now is that nobody's coming up 43rd. To use 228th.
I don't know specifically what one you're talking about, or I can't get into the specifics of an individual application.
I can share this with you offline then. Councilmember Stewart.
I just want to reiterate that Josh already confirmed that we have a 99% accuracy on our modeling, so based on our calibration. So I realize that there could be some random trips that maybe aren't 100% accurate, but I mean, to say that things are wrong because we're modeling them inaccurately, I think the science and the data speaks otherwise, so.
Councilmember Roth.
If I can
Go ahead, Josh.
Just for 1 second here, what we're trying to do is use a model to predict human behavior 6 years in the future. I guarantee you we will be wrong, but I can also guarantee you that your model is one of the more calibrated models out there. So is it perfect? Absolutely not. I would never say that. Industry standard is within 20% for traffic forecasting and traffic modeling. If we, forecast out to 2025 and we're measuring in 2025, if we were within 20%, we did a really good job. Things are going to change. And is every vehicle in the model making the perfect pattern that someone will do in the future? Absolutely not. That is not travel demand modeling. That is not traffic forecasting. So there will be erroneous trips coming from large developments. But what we're looking at is, on average, your model is 99% correct. So we can get into the minutia if you want to, but big picture, your model is very good, and it is replicating what we saw in 2016 with those counts.
Councilmember Councilmember Ross, did you have anything? You took your light off.
Yeah, I'm going to wait till we have
Okay.
staff questions.
Okay,
So
and I
finish
think
the
we're
technical
starting to
questions.
go there because that's.
Okay.
Do you have questions for Josh or staff?
No, mine probably go to staff.
Okay, Councilmember Hornish.
All right, so questions for staff and Cheryl in particular. When you get a concurrency application, Cheryl, who do you typically talk to as far as what assumptions should be built into the model that Josh runs? Does it include the developer who's making the application? Does it include engineering? Does it include legal? Just who makes those assumptions is what I'm trying to find out.
So we talk with the applicant. I will actually look to Stephen because he's the one that is most intimately involved with it. But we do talk with Josh, as he said, on occasion. It depends on how complicated and how straightforward the project is. We do. So I don't know, Stephen, if you have anything more to add.
I'm sorry, does he? Okay.
When an applicant submit application, they usually require to submit a trip generation memo, which they use the standard, the IT standard to estimate the number of trips that's going to be generated by the traffic, by the projects. And then Public Department will review those trip generation and forward to our traffic modeler, DEA, to review. And once we agree on those trip generations, we will conduct the concurrency test.
And I might add.
Okay, that's on the.
Oh, sorry. I
Go
might
ahead,
add,
Cheryl,
if we don't agree that the estimates are supported by the ITE, the Institute of Transportation Engineers travel or trip generation manual, we will ask the applicant to show us why it doesn't comply with that and our public works standards. So we do use that trip generation manual as the basis for which we say, yes, your approach is consistent with that manual and our public works standards.
Okay, so then who then tells Josh what TIP projects to include or not to include?
So the TIP projects that he does include in the model is those that are listed on the adopted 6-year TIP that have estimated costs that are estimated costs to completely construct that particular project. So, for example,
Complete guy, he mentioned that. it should be billed out at the end of 6 years, is what you're saying.
That's correct. So we do have a couple of projects on the tip that are just a study, 218th. That one, there's just money in there to do the design. So that one is not included. It's not considered completed in the 6-year tip as far as the model goes.
Okay. So now I'm going to get into specifics that we had long discussions on the tip, that it was all about reasonably expected, including the 6-year concurrency projects that are included. But I guess only the concurrency projects, or all projects on the tip are included. One final question first before I get to my point. All projects on the tip are included for the concurrency model, or just those that solve the concurrency?
It is all projects that show estimated costs to completely construct the scope of work that's identified on the tip.
Within the 6 years. Okay.
That's correct.
When we were talking about the tip, we had a long discussion, as you probably recall, and I made a big point that the tip has a standard of reasonably expected to be able to put it on. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Can you help me then in our code 14A10010 concurrency requirement? The last sentence says, for the purposes of city's concurrency requirement, concurrent with the development shall mean that improvement or strategies are in place at the time of development, or that and I'm going to emphasize here, financial commitment is in place to complete the improvements or strategies within 6 years. I focus on the word commitment. Are you telling me that your interpretation of commitment in our code is the same as reasonably expected to put it on the tip?
So can you ask the question again? I'm sorry.
The code requires that the only thing that's included is the 6-year tip that has been committed, a financial commitment. We passed a tip as a body. I didn't vote for it, but we passed a tip that everybody said, oh, it's just reasonably expected. It's just a planning document. It won't impact anything. And now we're using numbers that are only reasonably expected. In fact, we have council members even stating there is no commitment. This doesn't solve the concurrency because it's not a committed funding for the concurrency projects. But yet you use it for the concurrency. Is that what you're telling me? Because it's reasonably expected and it's on the tip, even though we stated it's not committed and our code requires it to be committed. Is that what you're saying?
So let me quote a couple of definitions under financial commitment in our code. And I apologize for the having to read this, but I don't want to misstate it. It says that a financial, and again, I'm only reading part of the code. I'm not reading the whole definition of a financial commitment. It does say that, sorry, I think I'm too close. Revenue designated in the most currently adopted CIP for transportation facilities or strategies needed in the committed network for the transportation adequacy measure to test for concurrency. The financial plan underlying the adopted CIP identifies all applicable and available revenue sources and forecasts these revenues through the 6-year period that can be reasonably expected. Projects to be used in defining the committed network shall represent those projects that are anticipated to be constructed in the 6 years of the CIP. This commitment is reviewed annually through the budget process. And then another part of that definition, let's see, it says revenues that can be imposed or expended at the discretion of the city including, but not limited to, impact fees, SEPA mitigation payments, property taxes, real estate excise taxes, user fees, charges, intergovernmental entitlements, and bonds. And in one of the recent discussions that we had with council, I want to say it was June or July, our council, our attorney has said that even just the councilmanic bonding capacity, there is plenty of capacity there to be able to pay for the projects that are on the tip. And I will, defer to Mike to actually say that more clearly, I think, with the legal word.
Well,
I'm speaking with the finance director right now. Council, you probably recall we had this discussion a couple of times, and that reasonable assurance standard, which is set forth in state law, it's different but consistent with the municipal code provision that Tom Hornish just read. But the reasonable assurance standard means that under the WAC, that the projected funding capacities are based on revenues that are, quote, reasonably expected to be available under existing laws and ordinances to carry out the plan. So again, as I mentioned, I'm not aware of a TIP ever being challenged to the Growth Board. Not to say that it hasn't occurred, but I'm not aware of one. I would feel quite confident going to the board if there were a challenge, saying that I think it was about $230 million or $240 million of councilmanic bonding capacity that this council has at its disposal without using voter approval would satisfy that reasonably expected to be available standard.
Okay, and I'm glad we're talking to you now, Mike, because what I don't understand, and I'm not sure I totally agree with that, and Cheryl, maybe you can email me the financial commitment definition in our code, or tell me what that section is.
Certainly, it is.
Oh,
sorry.
Go ahead.
It's 14A.10. Let's see. .010 and I think it's 14A.15. But I will email those.
Wait a minute, 14A.15?
I think that's the definitions.
No, that's street impact fees, 14A05. I see it now. Okay.
05, okay.
I'll come back to that.
I'll send that to you.
So, okay. So coming back then real quick, Mike, I hear what you're saying. But what I don't understand is when you had 7 members saying we are not committed to this project for Sahalee on the tip, how that can then be used in concurrency. Can you explain that to me?
I can tell you, Tom, my understanding is, number one, council adopted a tip, so it is in force. It not only is applicants and property owners and citizens are not only entitled to take advantage of it, they're required to follow it because this council approved it. Number two, no disagreement, in fact, total agreement with your statement that I think every council member and in fact Acting Director Paston said this is probably not a project that we're going to want to build. The direct answer to your question then is those are completely different analyses. Number one is you have a tip under, at least I'm confident with the councilmanic bonding capacity, you've demonstrated reasonable assurance to build the projects on that tip. Other side of that analysis, though, is sounds like that's not a project that this council wants to build, and you can change the tip. As we've talked, you can amend the tip after a public hearing, but you did approve a tip showing no concurrency failures. Applications came in and certificates were granted based on the approved tip.
And we were told it was a planning document. We find out it's not a planning document. Well, no, it's not. It's used to pass concurrency. Nobody explained that to us, so I feel very misled. Now, let me ask a question that when it says, I'm looking at the definition now, revenue designated in the adopted CIP for transportation needed in the committed, where to go? Oh, sources of public or private funds or combinations that have been identified which will be sufficient. So where are these funds for Sahalee coming from?
I'm sorry,
what's the identification of those funds? Where those funds for all the projects on the tip, have we ever identified where the money's coming from?
I'm just pulling up the definition now, but I mean, without reading here while you're on the phone, no, I don't think there's a specific identification of each and every dollar where they're coming from. I think that the adopted tip does satisfy the requirement for a tip in state law. But again, I think we're talking, you're raising a somewhat different issue, not whether or not the tip is valid. I think it is. It's approved and in my judgment satisfies the funding issue. You're raising a different question, and I see it's based on a provision in city code here, but I'll have to pull that up and actually read it.
Well, and I think you explained to us that the tip is different than the concurrency on the June 18th meeting. Do you remember that?
I don't remember all of the discussion at the June 18th meeting. I do know that the tip is a required part of, under GMA, the tip is a required part of our transportation element of the comp plan. I certainly remember that discussion.
Right, but what you explained was that they are two separate things, concurrency and tip, but now we find out they're not. So that's a little frustrating.
Yeah,
I'm done.
And I continue to think they are, but I understand your position.
Please go back and look at the tape on June 18th.
Will do.
Council, it appears that Councilmember Stewart needs to leave. She is not next in the queue. Could I get the council members that are in front of her some grace to allow her to speak one last time before she needs to leave? Yes, thank you. Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you very much. I just want to, for the record, clarify the statement where we all agreed that that project wasn't the one we would build specifically as designed, because we all agreed that we could do better. We're certainly not going to do nothing on Sahalee. At least I'm not going to do that. I've been on this council for a year and a half, and I've been pushing that we get to work on actually making things better, and that we all agreed that we could build a project that would add more capacity for less money than the one that's on the tip. So while I agree that we said this is probably not exactly what we're going to do, most of the projects that aren't fully designed aren't going to be exactly what we build, because we're going to get into design and we're going to find ways to do it better. So I just want to clarify that for people so that they don't think that, you know, at least from my perspective, I can't imagine where we would say we're not going to do anything to make it better. There are lots of options that we have that will cost a lot less, that may have less impact on the environment, and that will allow us to add even more capacity. Hopefully fewer cars, but moving more people. So thank you very much. I appreciate the council allowing me to speak, and I'm sorry that I have to leave.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Moran. Microphone. Okay. Councilmember Ross.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the planning document concept. And just to echo, there was a resounding rejection of that Sahalee Road project by all 7 of us. Yes, for example, Councilmember Ritchie said no one in their right mind would invest in it. Ramiro Valderrama had the similar sentiment. Councilmember Stewart was to break out and separate the safety components, focus on safety and potential transit improvements. Deputy Mayor Moran's safety analysis needs to focus on safety. And Hornish and Melcha both didn't support the tip, pulled the project out entirely or not include it because of that project. So then I go back and we had this discussion about the financial commitment and the reasonable assured discussion. Well, that's really only to be compliant with the transportation component of the GMA. We did it. We're fine. We complied. We turned it in. But it has, in my opinion, no relevancy to the concurrency modeling. In particular, the code says, the ordinance says it shall mean that improvements or strategies, improvements are not in place, nor are strategies. All 7 of us do not have a plan for Sahalee. In fact, it's anywhere from nothing to safety improvements, but it certainly is not an established strategy, in my opinion, should be fed into the concurrency model. And that's what I really ask is, if we're using the tip wholesale to inform the concurrency model, then we really need to rethink our policy, because that makes absolutely no sense if the council has not authorized in any form of signal to the staff that we want to move forward with the project. I think our signal was very loud and clear on the 18th, And so it's very disappointing that it was actually included, and I think we really need to rethink about what's included in the model. I'm also kind of puzzled by the ITE model count. We keep referencing and it came out to roughly 300 cars from an independent calculation. Now, it could be, and we had 10, 20% of that amount in total. So I'm concerned about the trip generation from the ITE model, especially given the dialogue that we take the ITE calculation and we modify it in consultation with other individuals, including the developer. So what happened to those traffic counts? That's a concern. I need some go back on that. And also, I'd like to ask staff, were any of you surprised with the results? The narrative has always been, Sahalee just has a little bit. We've heard all along and over the last several months that this is not going to be sufficient to support the town center. You're going to have to do something different or to accommodate that. And then it's to me, it was a surprise that the results. I'm sure it's a surprise to many. And so what type of independent analysis did staff perform if you were surprised? Or was it what you expected? And I guess that's a question I have to staff is, were you surprised by the results and what type of follow-up independent analysis did you perform?
So, you know, whether we are surprised or not, I don't know that that's, what we did was we followed the process and the procedures and the policies that are set forth in our code, in our comprehensive plan that the council, we proposed to the council and the council has adopted. You know, we're all surprised about a lot of things, but again, I want to reiterate that with all of our concurrency testing, it is a ministerial, and we'll thank DCD for coming up with that really great phrase, that it is once the concurrency application is deemed complete, then it's like a recipe. We send the numbers to the model, to Josh in this case. He runs the model. He compares it against the standards that the council has approved, both for the intersections, the segments, and the corridors, and the AM and the PM. So, you know, we've discussed that in quite a few meetings. So he runs the model. He double checks he does his internal QA/QC review. He sends us the report. We look at the report and make sure that he followed the process that again is laid out in our code, and then we issue or deny the certificate. So I know there were a lot of questions that came up about, well, did staff somehow manipulate the process? And I want to reassure the council and the public that the process that's laid out in our code, that we followed it. Now again, like Josh said, the model cannot replicate every single individual human's decision points when they come to an intersection. It is that's not the purpose of this particular model. Your other question about where you said the purposes of the city's concurrency requirement, concurrent with development shall mean that improvements or strategy are in place at the time of development. And I guess I want to add that Councilmember Hornish read that or that a financial commitment is in place. So that is part of our code. It's 14A.10.010. In regards to your question about the 300 cars from the ITE model, I'm not really sure what you meant by that, so maybe if you can expand on that. In regards to us discussing with a developer on the expected trips, it is their responsibility to show us how are they coming up with those expected trips. And again, we tell them it needs to be supported by the ITE trip generation manual and our public works standards, because that is the basis. That is a very it's an accepted manual. It's used certainly across the U.S. In all applications. So well, actually, I should say there might be some cases where a development is large enough that they do their own studies, but we use the ITE trip generation manual that is in our code, and I can send you the citation on that if you'd like.
So I'd like to go back to the inclusion of a certain road from the tip in Sahalee in particular. There's one way of looking at it. Yes, financial commitment, et cetera. It permits us to have it compliant for concurrency with respect to the GMA transportation element. On the other side, doesn't the city have the right to look at that particular road and say, you know, we got no support for that segment, and frankly, it probably won't get built, and frankly, it probably won't, if we ran it with a modified version, expected version, it may not even support the new development. Are we asking, are we permitted to remove from the tip, are we locked in by our policies and ordinances to include everything in the tip, or do we have discretion to use independent judgment and say that one needs to be pulled out because we heard loud and clear it's not a good road to include?
I will defer.
We have discretion to pull those projects out. Again, you can amend the tip at any time after a public hearing. Could have deleted that project from the concurrency intersection list prior to adoption of the tip had you wanted to. And I believe staff raised that as a possibility. So.
But it's not entirely what I asked. I said if it's on the tip, using the tip to inform the model, is it permissible to pull that road and say use 9 of the 10 roads on the tip only?
Oh, gotcha.
That's the question.
That would take a little more research, Councilman. My fairly strong initial reaction is no, we couldn't do that unless you developed a formula, or we helped you develop a formula that was included in the tip for the manner in which some of that in a particular intersection or a particular tip project would be excluded, but that would take some more work.
So that if the answer is you doubt it, then it's very troubling that this so-called wish list is, and roads that are never going to get built, is not managing our infrastructure with development very well. It's bogus.
Councilmember Ross, if I might jump in this. If you do pull Sahalee off of the tip without doing something in addition to that decision, there will be a failure, an unaddressed failure on your tip. And from what I understand, that is a violation of the GMA. Now, there are consequences to that, and I'll look to Mike to describe that a little bit more completely. But an option that we've discussed a number of times, if you do want to pull Sahalee off the list, and I understand that these aren't easy decisions, and this is what I'll repeat, which we have presented to council a number of times. I'm not recommending any of these, but you certainly could raise the V over C. You could remove the corridors and segments, the Sahalee corridor and segments from concurrency. The intersections are still part of the concurrency program, so we are monitoring all of our arterials, which is a requirement. But if you want to remove Sahalee without any other decisions, there will be a failure, a concurrency failure in the next 6 years.
But we always forget to say,
Councilmember Hornish, I need to have everyone recognized before you speak. Thank you. Cheryl, go ahead.
Oh, I'm done.
Okay. Hold on, Councilmember Hornish. I've got Councilmember Valderrama that needs to speak. Councilmember Valderrama.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'm going to have to leave here shortly. Unfortunately, I was not consulted and had asked to move this meeting. That's first. I'm troubled by a number of discussions that have taken place. First of all, as in the last paragraphs of the agenda that was put that staff just determines.
Councilmember Valderrama, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Is this better? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So I'm troubled by, first, we've been trying to insinuate that staff has had some role in this, and that's been very clear. It's not. It's in the last two paragraphs of the agenda. I will ask you all to take a look at that, making it very clear that staff has not been manipulating this, as some people have tried to say. Second of all, I'm troubled by how everybody was trying to be a traffic engineer. We've been told it's 99% accurate, and that this model is calibrated to the nth degree and better than our neighboring cities here. So that one's now gone away. Now there's a third theory about the tip that's going on, and I think that people didn't know. I think it's very disingenuous to the public and to ourselves to pretend we did not know that there was a pre-app meeting that had taken place with developers and people that were submitting permits, and that concurrency applications were also in process. To say otherwise is disingenuous, and to pretend that we live in a vacuum, and that was well known across the city. So I'm troubled with those three lines of thinking. We did all say that we were not happy with that road, we're not liking it, it's not going to get built, we have to figure out how to go. But we did approve it. We didn't want to raise on that day the V over C. We did not want to yet accept it. I think everybody knows eventually we will be taking it off the list. So, again, all three lines of these questions that have gone when we're trying to pretend we're traffic engineers, and we're trying to deny what's going on with the staff, and third of all, trying to pretend that there was some other situation that we didn't know of an application and process. What really happens here is we've spent millions, over $1 million in a year for something that we agreed on, the level of service at the intersection that past council and present council went and agreed to. In October, we then added an arbitrary measure by a 4-3, and people thought that that was predetermined to make everything fail. Because we're not traffic engineers and we didn't test the model, it has run through the model, it has passed, and now people are trying to be Monday quarterbacks and trying to change the storyline. That's not the case. I apologize, I can't stay much longer here. I have previous meetings that I now have to attend, but hope that we can bring this to some closure. Thank you.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Thank you. Cheryl, and maybe Mike, to try to help us understand, as far as the Growth Management Act is concerned, looking forward, were we hypothetically to, at some future date, take the Sahali road projects off of our concurrency, or off of our TIP, and not do anything else, the options Cheryl listed, if we did nothing else and we left an existing known failure based on our concurrency model out there, what does that do? What are the ramifications of that? I mean, why did we put this on, right? I mean, I remember what we did, and maybe I just think it's worthwhile talking about briefly what the legal ramifications, the GMA ramifications, what opportunities having that road on the tip gives us going forward as far as grants are concerned. Can you guys speak to that a little bit?
I think there's a couple of aspects there, Councilmember Ritchie. First of all, without question, and as was mentioned several times during your debates on the TIP, yes, the TIP must comply with the GMA, and if we have a project that on the TIP that results in a known concurrency failure, that is highly unlikely to comply with the GMA. So some of the alternatives that staff provided, like Cheryl said, is just take off the segments, for example, from your concurrency basket, and that would solve the problem. Another issue that has been discussed with council, and council, we understand this is a difficult decision. Concurrency is a very complex issue, both legally and technically. So we get this is a tough call. But remember, tough policy call for you. Remember, though, that there's a couple of aspects to funding or providing satisfying concurrency. One is the financial commitment, having the money there. The other part of the definition, though, is you can have strategies either in place at the time of the development or funded 6 years later. Strategies are defined pretty generally and pretty broadly in the GMA. So would it be a reduced level of service? Almost certainly, but strategies, for example, this is right out of the Act, may include increased public transportation service, ride-sharing programs, demand management, and other transportation system management strategies. Transportation system management strategies is further described by the WAC, the Washington Administrative Code, as, quote, the use of low-cost solutions to increase the performance of the transportation system. These include, not limited to, signalization, channelization, ramp metering, incident response programs, bus turnouts, and similar things. So, again, it's a tough call for you. I completely understand it. But I think that's one of the options that the staff has suggested would both leave Sahalee on the tip and solve the concurrency issue if you choose not to remove the segments from the concurrency analysis entirely. So.
If I can jump in on this whole part of the discussion that we're having tonight, we've had a number of times about financial commitments and potential sources of revenue. So if you recall, I don't remember, it was either one of the two meetings in July that Chris Giannini, who's our deputy finance director, and I were ready to give you a sort of a primer on financial potential sources for revenue for this project. It is in your packet. We can certainly send it to you. So some of this, sorry, Councilmember Hornish, this goes back to a couple of questions ago that I didn't want to interrupt, but that presentation was intended to start the discussion about potential sources of revenue for not only the transportation CIP, but there are certainly a number of other needs that the city has to make sure that we are able to provide the services to the community as you all direct. In regards to this financial commitment for concurrency, there is a number of statements in the RCW and in our own code that talk about the plans for through the next 6 years. For example, for the impact fees, and this is a consequence. And again, like Mike said, this is a complicated issue, and there's a lot of things that relate to each other. That if you make a decision here, there's implications for other actions that the council will need to take. And one of these is the impact fee. So the impact fee that we are in the process of updating, and it's on hold now because we're not sure what you want to do with Sahalee, that the impact fees in part are based on the projected cost for the next 6 years. If you only want us to look at the 2-year, like the 2-year budget cycle for the impact fee, that will dramatically affect what the actual fee is. And one of the things that the council has been really clear to us on in developing not only the transportation master plan, which we've restarted. Again, we have some really great news on that. But also in the impact fee is to keep the impact fee high. So part of that, one of the pieces that goes into the equation of the impact fee is what's on your 6-year tip. There's language also in the again, the RCW in our own codes that talk about, let's see. Right now I'm quoting RCW 35.77.010. The title is, it's kind of a long one, Perpetual Advanced 6-Year Plans for Coordinated Transportation Program Expenditures, Non-Motorized Transportation and Railroad Rights of Way. And one of the statements in here is that the purpose of this section is to assure that each city and town shall perpetually have available advanced plans looking to the future for not less than 6 years as a guide in carrying out a coordinated transportation program. So, for example, there's been a lot of interest in requests for staff to coordinate with our neighboring sister cities, so Issaquah and Redmond, and certainly with WashDOT and King County, to coordinate not only our operations, like Mike just described some of them, but our capital projects as well. And unless we can indicate that we have some assurance that our future projects will be built, it's hard to coordinate with them. Now, I know that this isn't directly addressing why are the TIP projects in the concurrency model, but unless they're in our pipeline model, we can't project ahead what we think the impacts are. And as you know, a lot of these transportation projects, it takes multiple years to just even talk about them, much less try to get everybody's efforts moving in the same direction, along with funding, along with what the community wants. So I just wanted to add some of that information to the discussion around the whole financial commitment.
Deputy Mayor Moran.
Was Tom not going to speak?
Oh, I've got a lot to say too. So.
Okay, well, I want to go to, and it's our code, and it is 14A 510. Under financial commitment. Financial commitment means that sources of public or private funds or combinations thereof have been identified which will be sufficient to finance public facilities necessary to support development, that there are reasonable assurances that said funds will be put in a timely manner. We don't have that. We don't have that on Sahalee. We didn't have it on Sahalee in June. We didn't have it on July. In my opinion, it should not have been put into the model. I'm not going to get here and get into the weeds on the trips of the roads or anything else. I think that I'm just going to go and my complaint's done that because I just wrote it down. One, I want to thank the public because you guys have been great in coming out and hearing from, and I'm sorry the thing said 14. I heard from 14 probably in the first 10 minutes. So I want to thank everybody that has contacted the council and called and everything else. And I want to say that as a council member, I have been elected water commissioner, I have been on state boards, I have been on county committees, and I have never been in a situation where I've been blindsided and had public phone calls to let me know that this is going on without having any information. I didn't like it. I didn't like finding out and having that happen to me, to somebody I was talking to from public. So we were all learning at the same time. So as you were reading things that were being said or heard, or you saw things on Facebook, you need to understand that the people that were on the council, that is not what is supposed to happen here. The policy that has always been here since I've been here is that council members are to know first. That did not happen. So we did not know. We did not have the information. We could not share anything we knew because we knew basically nothing. And for that, I do apologize. As far as going through the numbers, I don't really want to go through that. The biggest problem I have is the fact that it just doesn't pass the sniff test. It just doesn't. I don't know why. You know, why all of a sudden, 228th, are we saying is not going to take traffic? Well, then who cares about buses? Nobody's going to be using the damn road. Why worry about it? That doesn't make sense to me. 43rd is not going to get used. Then why worry about doing the Issaquah Pine Lake Road? Nobody's going that way. It doesn't make sense. It should have required, or at least have had enough attention to have required or thought of a second look. I think that had that have gotten to council first, we would have asked those questions. So I would think, and I would think the people that are in Town Center, and I would think anybody else would think that it really deserves a review. Because I don't think that the idea, I've heard people say, oh, take certificates or they shouldn't have those. I don't think that's fair either. But I do think what's reasonable, and it should be fair to everybody, is that it get reviewed. And then the last thing is is the other problem I'm having with this whole thing is, as I'm thinking about the guy who's got the small plat, and I'm thinking about somebody who wants to build single-family houses. We have been a bedroom community since the time we started. And what we've said and what we're changing is that now we've got town center going in, and now we've got people that aren't going to be able to, they're going to, first, I can tell you, I'm sitting up here going, regardless of whether we take Sahalee off or we do anywhere we turn tonight, I can pretty much tell you we've got a lawsuit. Somebody's going to sue us. Whether it's going to be the small guy who's going to tell us, hey, I can't build my small plats, or we turn around and it could be SDCA going, hey, you're holding up my certificates, or hell, it could be some past mayor who's not happy. Either way, it's going to be a problem, and somebody's going to sue us. So I sit up here and I kind of look at what is the lesser of any evil. And so I ask that as you look at it, you look at it from that standpoint. There isn't a good way out of this. And so we kind of have to look at what I think is best for, I have to look at it as what I think is best in this situation. And, I think everybody would want to know, okay, how did that happen? A review would be better for everybody, and I'm going to suggest that. But I am going to say, please keep that in mind. We can't just come and say, well, we're going to do this, because it's going to create a legal situation on this side. So anyway, I'm going to get off my little soapbox here for the moment, and then I'm going to come back with some more questions.
Okay. All right, I have several questions and several thoughts. First, it was stated just a couple minutes ago that the impact fees are on hold because of Sahalee, but we're granting concurrency certificates based on that same project. That seems counterintuitive, because the project we know is going to morph, and we heard a little bit about the project and how we're going to continue on with it, and I agree, but here's the rub, is that we granted specific capacity to that roadway with the adopted Transportation Improvement Plan project that we put on there. We cannot taketh away now. We are now married to the capacity that was granted by that project. Otherwise, the concurrency certificates that we gave are basically were given in a manner that was incongruent with adopted policy based on we have a failing roadway. We had to give it more capacity. We adopted that. I did not vote for that Transportation Improvement Plan, and I'm going to tell you why. I did not vote for the TIP because we use our Transportation Improvement Plan as a parking lot for projects that we don't execute. We have an incredibly long history of putting projects on our Transportation Improvement Plan and not doing them. In a 2015 concurrency certificate, we used the 2014 Transportation Improvement Plan, and on it, it states that the 6-year committed threshold of Issaquah Pine Lake Road was given on that certificate. Yet on the 2014 Transportation Improvement Plan, we have no funding for Issaquah Pine Lake Road. That Issaquah Pine Lake Road, as I've stated before, has been on our Transportation Improvement Plan for 13 years, and we've never done it. Sahalee has been as a concurrency project on our TIP for years, and we've never done it. And before it was exempted or taken away from concurrency, East Lake Sammamish Parkway was on our TIP for improvement, and we never executed it. I have a question. The SEPA was granted to Town Center in 2007, prior to some changes. I want to ask staff, the SEPA certificate that was it given based on projects that the city assumed would be completed, which includes Sahalee, Issaquah Pine Lake Road, and East Lake Sammamish Parkway?
David Pyle, Community Development. So that was actually done through an environmental impact statement.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, I was not here at the time, was not part of that process. I've read specific components of that EIS document related to rezones particularly. However, I have not read in depth the transportation analysis component that led to the issuance of a final EIS. So keep in mind that an EIS is not an approval statement. It is merely a disclosure statement. All it is intended to do is identify potential adverse impacts associated with the project and what potential mitigation measures might be employed to diminish those impacts below a threshold level of significant. So we would have to go back to that EIS, look through that chapter in the EIS, and get an idea as to whether those projects were included and reliant upon in that statement to get to the threshold levels that they identified with that document.
So I think that would be something that we should look into, because if we're making the assumption, or we made the assumption on the adoption of the town center plan that we were going to execute projects, that we now know we're not executing anything down here on East Lake Sammamish Parkway. So that's not going to be done. And we also know, based on the modeling, that when people are leaving the city and they're traveling northbound, that's where they're going, right? So now we're putting all the trips down on East Lake Sammamish Parkway, to which this council and previous councils have said, can't fix it. So I'm just concerned about the overall impacts to the roads that we designated through SEPA that were going to be completed, and whether or not they will be completed. So back to the transportation improvement plan, and I'm going to reference several notes because I've got chicken scratch everywhere on here. It was stated that it's anticipated to be expected to be completed in 6 years. We're already behind the 8 ball on fixing that project. So the Growth Management Act states that we have to do the projects within 6 years, or within the time of the development impact, right? So I'm assuming that means occupancy, not when you grant the concurrency certificate. But based on past history, in terms of granting concurrency certificates to other town center projects, they are done before 6 years. So we are behind the 8 ball if we're not planning on a project that we haven't started, that this council has said, wait a second, we don't have the right project in front of us. I don't actually think that we can execute that project in 6 years if we're starting over and saying, we don't have the right project going on. But again, we have to at least keep the capacity that we granted through the Transportation Improvement Plan when this council passed it on any future iteration. So anything that comes back to council in September on Sahalee should at least have that base capacity, because that's how we gave the concurrency certificates. Is that a fair statement?
So I know this isn't popular, and maybe I shouldn't keep bringing it up, but there are options that the council can take. Again, one is which to raise the V over C or remove the roads and corridors from concurrency. And you know, again, I'm not saying that that's what you should do, but and as far as the change in scope for Sahalee, if the council chooses to change the scope dramatically so that it reduces the available capacity below the number of trips that we've already granted, you know, I don't know. I'll defer to legal on the consequences of that. Sorry, I'm trying to remember all the things that you said, but you were questioning our track record in implementing capital projects that have been approved, and that does happen. There are reasons, you know, outside of certainly staff's control that happens. For example, when Klahani was encouraged to incorporate to the city, there were promises made that we would put the Issaquah Falls City Road, make that project a priority. That was a commitment that the city made. There's only so many funds that the city had in order to make that project happen. Not only that, just, you know, we've talked a number of times of not wanting to lock down the whole southern end. Yep. So part of it that resulted in Pine Lake project, frankly, being pushed out a bit, because you don't want to completely lock down the south end in construction. So there are things that happen outside of even your control that causes changes in the tip. And in addition, you referenced the 2007, what was the EIS. Mm-hmm. The council certainly has the ability, and it has, to change concurrency. the whole concurrency model. So the failures that we had listed, that we had modeled in 2015, they're different now because you changed the goalposts. So there are reasons why the tip does change over time. You know, what we intend and what actually happens. Usually that never, plans don't go according to plans, and things change. So, but we understand the frustration, and we are certainly trying our best to implement them based on the schedule that we've proposed.
And I appreciate the fact that you're utilizing what you have in front of you as far as adopted code, but I think council may need to give staff some additional direction so that we avoid the scenario that we are currently in, which is why I voted no on the tip, because we use the projects on there for concurrency, yet our city attorney has stated we can change it at any time. But we can't change it at any time if we're granting concurrency certificates based on what's on our transportation improvement plan. And, you know, the other concurrency certificate that I'm looking at from 2015 states a capacity of Issaquah Pine Lake Road that is significantly larger than what it is now, because it's assuming that we have 3 and 5 laned it already. But we're not going to 3 and 5 lane it. Not even on our current tip is it going to be 3 and 5 lanes. But I want to ask our city attorney a question about funding and whether or not we're compliant with the GMA by doing this. Could we have not placed design dollars for Sahali Way? Even if we're not showing it completed within the 6 years. Now, that doesn't allow for you to issue a concurrency certificate because we don't have a completed road for the failure. But it gives 2 options. One is that it gives us time to finalize the design so that we know exactly what project we're going to execute up there. And it does give the opportunity for an applicant to fund it themselves. Would that still leave us compliant with the GMA?
Good question. The standard, as we know, is it has to be, because now we're talking about financial commitment in place to complete the improvements within 6 years. We could make a reasonable argument that design dollars this year is a good step toward that financial commitment. But you can see what the challenger, if there was a challenger, would say that no, design doesn't build a project, and therefore you're not going to have those improvements in place at the time of development. So, I mean, those would be the counter arguments, and both sides would do much legal research to convince the board of the correctness of their position.
And if I can add back to your question about the Issaquah Pine Lake and the 2015 tip.
2014.
Or sorry, 2014. That was under a different concurrency policy, different concurrency model. There were a couple other things I forget.
I know, but the concurrency certificate was 2015 , so that was under that same.
It was, but the concurrency model is different now. So if you're comparing,
I'm not comparing.
I think you said,
I'm saying that we are on the concurrency certificate. You're showing the capacity in 6 years on Issaquah Pine Lake Road based on an adopted tip that has no money funding it other than design dollars. I don't understand that. And I mean, Issaquah Pine Lake Road, as you know, has been one of those projects that I've, keep bringing up because it's been on there for so long. And I certainly appreciate that development has done some of it for us along the way. That's great. Right. But my point is that we put projects on our transportation improvement plan and we never do them. And if we're granting concurrency certificates based on projects that are on there that we never do, that is a problem. And I would prefer to not have that practice. I will look to staff for coaching on how I word a motion that directs our city manager to say that we're not going to use our transportation improvement plan for concurrency certificates unless we are nailed down on the project and we're moving forward. Issaquah Falls City Road, I know we're moving forward with that one, right? We have grant funding. We know exactly what we're doing. We have a plan. It's been approved. This council has said go, right? We haven't said go on Sahali. In fact, we said stop. Let's back up. But we're using it to approve development, and that is where I think the concern is. And how do we prevent that from repeating in the future?
Understood. And I'll offer Chris time to come back and start talking about the options for revenue, generating revenue to pay so that you can make your financial commitment, so you can be very certain that you'll have the revenue to build these projects.
The revenue is only half of it. The revenue's only half of it. The other half is council can change its mind. And that is a problem because, you know, let's just say we've got a new council next year and they say, we're not going to do Sahalee at all. We don't want to spend $54 million on that project. We don't want to do it. But we're giving concurrency certificates along the way, and even on a project we're not going to do. How do I stop that practice?
I cannot speak for council. The council can make
I have some language here on a motion, but I'm not exactly sure how to frame it, I'll be honest with you, because I don't know at what point have we gone so far in design of a project that we can't ever go back, right? And it's probably unrealistic to say that, because I mean, council could have pulled the rug out from underneath Essequibo Falls City Road too, right? But I think there's a point to which you've gone so far that you're not going to go backwards. Right now, we haven't even, you know, we've talked about what it looks like maybe. We need some turn lanes and you know, center turn pocket up on Sahalee, but we haven't gotten very far in that discussion. So it's easy to morph that project, but whatever we morph it to has to keep that capacity. So I can offer up language, and if staff wants to make some suggestions on refining it, I would be certainly amenable to that. So I'm going to move to direct our city manager to use the transportation improvement plan as a planning document only and not to include projects on it for the purposes of concurrency modeling until such time that council and the public have seen or approved at least a 50% design level on a project. Funding has been identified and approved by the council if necessary to ensure projects used for concurrency are actually projects that will be completed within the 6 years or at the time development occurs to be congruent with the language in the Growth Management Act.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion? Councilmember Ritchie.
I have a question.
Okay, hold on. Councilmember Ritchie.
So I appreciate the intent of the motion. I do. I think I sent an email out a couple months ago or a couple weeks ago talking about this kind of thing and making sure we're funding our projects on our tip and kind of holding our feet to the fire. I think my question relative to the motion is, by doing that, are we removing our other options by speaking to the motion and trying to address that? To Cheryl, if we approve this motion, are we removing the other opportunities that we have to deal with traffic failures? For example, I believe, and I don't want to paraphrase, but I think what I heard from the mayor is that we are wedded, or we must build that road the way we said we would in our tip, because that project caused, or that tip project caused the concurrency certificate to be passed or approved. If that's an accurate statement, then are there other things we can do, excluding just moving, taking the V over C and just going intersections like the intersection LS, other options? If we move forward on this motion, are we removing those options from us, from our ability to utilize those?
This is the first time I've heard the motion. I really don't want to tell you yes or no. Absolutely, we need to look into this and discuss it. What I will say is that as far as options for Sahalee, if you recall, I want to say it was May, it was earlier this year, the council had asked us to look at other options for Sahalee, and we came back with a handful, 4 or 5, maybe 7 or 8. Some of those options did not result in adding enough calculated capacity.
Right.
Okay, this is all calculated capacity. Using our traffic model, we've had a lot of discussions with that. The one that is on the tip did, again, calculated. It added enough capacity to take us out of concurrency failure.
Right.
Now I'll make a pitch for doing the TMP, because the TMP is intended to look at other options to pull demand off of roads, not just Sahalee, but other roads too, but certainly Sahalee. Transit, peak spreading, multimodal options, none of them are a what do you call it, a silver bullet, but collectively, it may actually add capacity without having to put this $50-60 million project on your tip. We are moving as fast as we can with the TMP. We've been doing we've been getting some really great results with the public outreach. I know it's in the summertime. I know there's concerns about holding it in the summertime, but in order to stay on our schedule to give you the completed or the draft transportation master plan so that we can go through the legislative review next year and make that the part of the comprehensive plan. We did need to do a lot of our public outreach this month. We did do a lot of outreach early in, I think it was 2017, and we have this really great online presence that the community can weigh in as well. So that's kind of a long answer. I'm not sure if I answered the whole thing, but no, certainly to the motion, I don't want to jump in and say yes or no.
Me neither, right? I mean, that's kind of why I asked the question. And I appreciate the sentiment in the motion. Like I said, I think that it's going the right direction. And, you know, given that there are some other people are not here right now and can't chime in, and given that this is a special meeting, and given that we do have questions that we don't have answers to yet, I'd like to make an amendment or a motion that we table this until we get back to our meeting on September 3rd or whenever it is, our next meeting, so that we can try to get those answers and address this issue then.
So that's a new motion, and we have a motion on the floor, so we have to vote on the motion on the floor first.
Okay.
So I think what I would say in consideration of kind of throwing this at staff and knowing that maybe you need to go back and look at what the impact of the motion that I'm making is, I still would prefer to have it voted on, because then I feel confident that we're not going to, while council is still out, you know, and can't get back at policy making until September, that I feel like I've got that stopgap in place, because I know that we're not executing the project we said we did, and concurrency certificates can continue to be issued until you trigger another failure, correct? Unless we give direction that says that's not a practice that we want.
So our attorneys have advised us that concurrency certificate, even before the 6-year TIP was adopted, our attorneys...
Cheryl, why don't we go in for an executive session for maybe 15 minutes,
okay,
Your Honor. Potential litigation being the subject.
Very good. Okay. We'll be back.
Tom, you're going to have to hang up and call the second number that you were given. No?
Mayor, are there any other questions for Josh? I'd like to, he's on vacation.
Okay.
I would like to release him.
I kind of suspect not. I feel like we got those out of the way, so. Okay. Thank you for indulging us. I need a motion to extend the meeting first.
Motion to extend?
Second.
Second.
7:30?
For, an hour.
Wow. All right. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, by a vote of 5-0, the meeting is extended until 7:30. Okay, so I am going to rescind my previous motion, and I am going to make a new motion, which is to direct our city manager to have staff remove Sahali Way segment and corridor project from our TIP for the use for concurrency tests until staff brings back the Sahali options that were previously slated to be for the September 17th, 2019 City Council meeting.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and second. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor, say aye and raise your hand, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Okay, by a vote of 4-1, the motion passes. Okay. Let me pull my packet back up here. We have a second item, which is discussion, the need for process and potential for reconsideration of the Transportation Improvement Plan. Is there any discussion on this? Okay, seeing none, I think the previous motion probably took care of that item. Anything additional from council before I move to public comment? Deputy Mayor Moran.
Yeah, I'm going to circle back to a comment that I made earlier about having an independent audit to be done to look at the model and to look at what had been put into the model. and to see, because really the model is only as good as what's put in is what you get out. It's kind of like garbage in, garbage out. At least that's what my computer says. Anyway, so I'd like to have, I'm making a motion that we direct the city manager to get some people in to just do an independent audit of the certificates that were released for the town center.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Councilmember Hornish?
I'm sorry, we're on that motion now on the table. I got no comment.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Moran, your light's still on. Do you want to speak to your motion? No. Okay. Deputy Mayor Moran, I have a couple questions, if I may. Your motion, make sure I got it right, to direct the city manager to do an independent audit to look at the model, and you said specifically of the current concurrency certificates, and I might have missed the rest of what you said, concurrency certificates.
Yeah, sorry. So an independent audit, so bring in some folks. You know, they do this periodically. We bring people in from surrounding cities and just have them come in, and it doesn't cost a bunch of money or anything. Or we can pay somebody to come in and just to look at the assumptions that were made and put into the models since, you know, going back to 2016 when they did the last calibration of the model, and following it forward to see, because I'm real concerned as to why we're not using our main thoroughfares, and see what calibrations and what assumptions were made in that model.
Okay. But I just want to get clarification, because you said of the concurrency certificates, are there specific ones you're talking about, or just all concurrency certificates? Like,
No,
I mean, what are they auditing
specifically said
specifically?
the last ones that were released for the town center area.
Mike, did you have a question?
Trying to understand the direction. Is it an audit of the assumptions that went into the model for the STCA concurrency certificates, or just assumptions going to the model generally?
Well, actually, they would probably be both, wouldn't they?
I don't know.
Okay, can I make I'd like to make an amendment to this and just have it be an independent audit to look at the assumptions and inputs into the model, period.
Okay.
That includes running the model, independent model.
Yes. Yeah, it would include how an output is gained.
My goal is to take away any of this, there was this done, there was that done, and it's just to take away any of that for anybody and to clarify and to look as to why we're not using our main roads.
I'll second Christie's motion.
Okay, the amendment. Okay, so we're going to vote on the amendment first, unless there's any other discussion, and the amendment was to just do a general independent audit of the model and the assumptions in it. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, by a vote of 4-1, the amendment passes. And now on the main motion as amended, to direct the city manager to do an independent audit to look at the inputs of the model and the assumptions made. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, by a vote of 4-1, we will give that direction to the city manager. Councilmember Hornish, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just want to, I got a comment that I'd like to clear up one thing when there was some discussion about options if we're failing concurrency that only threw out some of the options. And I made a comment, but I'm not sure it was heard. And it's always been forgotten in our 20 years, and it's never been highlighted, that we can reassess land use under the GMA. Nobody seems to mention that. But I want to throw that out. That's not a discussion for tonight, but it is an option that I wanted to highlight. Secondly, I want to say something to the public. We have what we have here is a failure to communicate. We had some misinformation, in my opinion, about what we adopted and what the TIP did. And we are the policy making. We shouldn't get in of the currency certificates and the calculations in the model. But when policy and the implementation of the policy is 180 degrees divergent, that's when we got to figure out, why isn't the policy being implemented the way we, as a body, the council, elected by you, is not being followed? And I think we have a little bit more to discuss that, but not for tonight.
Okay. So if I don't have any more comments from council, I am going to move to public comment. So.
Do we need to vote on it?
Pardon? So public comment, this is an opportunity for the public to address the council. 3-minute limit per person or 5 minutes of representing the official position of a recognized community organization. If you would like to show a video or a PowerPoint, it must be submitted or emailed by 5 p.m. the end of business day to the city clerk, Melanie Anderson, at manderson@sammamish.us. Please be aware that council meetings are videotaped and available to the public. First, I have Ken Gamblin. I think you make sure that microphone is turned on.
Bingo. Got it?
There we go.
Okay, I'd like 5 minutes for representing Save Sammamish. It's in my 3 minutes. So, hello, council. Thanks for coming in today on a Thursday afternoon or a Tuesday afternoon. So, I'd like to address a little bit on why our concurrency certification process is, in my opinion, a myth, and my observations on the subject of phantom road projects. Okay? I've watched this process very carefully over the last 2 years, and these are my observations. They may not be perfect. I asked some latitude because I'm trying my best, and I'm sorry I can't display this PowerPoint deck. We just didn't have time with the staff to get that set up today. Okay? So, real quickly touching Washington State Growth Management Act is very clear on concurrency. What it basically means in strategies and improvements are in place at the time of development, or that a financial commitment is in place to complete the improvement within 6 years. That's the law of Washington, GMA law. We also have the Sammamish TIP, Transportation Improvement Program, which is a list of identified roads within the city that we determine need improvements. Projects on the TIP right now are deemed complete as per the traffic volume improvements they provide before they're built, as soon as they're adopted. We use this TIP to assign concurrency certificates. So a concurrency certificate, for anybody who doesn't know, is a certificate that must be issued prior to the city issuing a building permit. So we look at the traffic that is created by a new development and how that traffic is applied to existing arterials to determine if that traffic will cause a failure. If the traffic failure is identified, then the failure must be mitigated before certificate is issued. The city can remedy the failure, or the developer can remedy the failure. The myth of concurrency testing. Projects on the TIP are considered completed when a concurrency test is run for a new development. It does not matter if the TIP project is funded, scheduled, or even agreed upon by the council. So again, all the traffic improvement benefits of the TIP project are applied as completed when the concurrency test is run for a new development. It's assumed as if the project is done, all the benefits and the traffic benefits are given to that development, and they determine whether it's approved at that point. So the logic on this, and I'm going to skip over this, I guess, but if we're failing, and we're failing by, say, 20 cars, then our existing capacity is short, the project would fail. But if we have a TIP road improvement that comes in and says on paper it's going to add 30 cars, then all of a sudden the project can pass concurrency on paper. So the problem with this is the TIP project most times don't get built. And whether they're built or not, they're used to approve the new development. Once the new developments are improved and built, they add irreversible and permanent traffic to the roads. TIP projects are not permanent. In fact, the TIP is referred to as a planning document and can be changed at any time, including removing projects from the TIP that have just been used to approve development. The TIP projects have been used to approve more traffic, do not need to be funded, scheduled, or even approved. So a relevant example, Sahale Way. The TIP for Sahale Way improvement was recently used on this concurrency run for the first phase of the town center. All the traffic improvements to the benefits treated as if it was completed already. Is the Sahale project a real project or a phantom project? Let's look at history. You can't see this, but I went back and looked at all our TIP projects. 2001, Sahale is there. It's called the CIP instead of the TAP. It's there, Sahale Way. 2012, Sahale is there. 2015, there's an article in the Issaquah Reporter saying that Sahale is there and we will build this project. 2019, our TIP project. Sahale is on this. This project has been on here for 19 years. And we are still including it as completed when we issue new certificates. 70% backlog on our TIP right now, from what's on the TIP to what we're actually building. Concurrency, when you look at it like this, is a lie. What it allows happen is it allows development to go on, new projects to be approved based on things we know are not going to happen, that the council knows they're not going to build these projects, and yet the benefit of those projects are given for new development. So the way we have it set up now is 100% toward increasing development and 0% toward increasing our infrastructure.
I do need you to wrap up.
Residents. Okay? Thank you. Council.
The next person I have on our list, I apologize, I cannot read the name. It starts with a V, and Southeast 36th Court is the address. Ah, perfect. Thank you. Sorry.
Hello. Yeah. So I'm not going to take much time here. I'm just going to have a few minutes for the council. So I would like to speak for myself, and I want to talk about the sniff test. So for past 10 years, me and my wife have been working in the downtown.
Do you need name and address?
So my name is Vinod Jagannathan. My address is, I live in the Southeast 36th Court. So my family has been working in downtown. So we saw a whole cycle of 520 being expanded, and we thought we'll reap the fruits of it. And a month after 520 got expanded, the light rail project started on 990. And net, for all the taxpayers' money we have paid, for everything we have paid, we have not reaped the benefit. And I'm continuously feeling that I'm paying forward to it. So what I'm here to present is that it's the rate of growth to rate of infrastructure has to match. My kids can feel it, I can feel it, everybody can feel it. The model is right, it's scientific, but at the end of the day, what input you give to it is what matters. So I'm not here to question the model. I'm here to make sure that we don't even suspect the intents of each other here. Everybody is here to do with the right intention, right work. Let's collaborate and make sure we have a rate of growth that meets our requirements and fulfills the needs of the city. Even my kids can feel it. Even my elder people can feel it. And you can go tell them with scientific data, but that's not going to win their hearts. They can feel it. There is congestion here. I can't go a full circle in the school and finish a drop of a kid and come out because the traffic is congested. And it's very blatant in our eyes, right before our eyes. So let's make sure that, especially with the STCA project, with all the good discussions we have had here, let's come at a middle ground that has some insight about the rate at which we are growing, and it convinces us. And lastly, let's present a great representation of good communication between the staff, council, and the public. It didn't have to be so bad. So let's make sure that something good happens and we all learn from it. And I'm totally thankful to the council members, to the staff, to the public here who are participating. That's what matters. If you participate in a community and make good things happen, we all will suffer. We can talk about politics in the world. It doesn't matter. It has to happen here, and I'm glad this is happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Celia Wu.
If I sound angry, it's because I'm hungry. I'm hangry. But, okay. So Celia Wu, I'm in Timberline Ridge. I'm actually not anti-town center. I'm one of those who think compromise is the best way out of this conundrum of infrastructure and overdevelopment. But one thing I am absolutely unwavering on is government accountability and transparency. And I believe government, both city council and staff, should work on behalf of its constituents, of its residents. The reason why I'm here and why so many of my other neighbors are here is an overwhelming concern that you are placing developers' interests over residents' concerns. This is no way to win over public opinion about the town center. In fact, it does the opposite. You are aware of how much, okay, actually, I'm gonna shorten this a bit. Your actions completely blindsided the city council, and by undermining our elected officials, you are undermining the residents that you serve. Given these actions from the city, how am I, as a constituent, going to trust the city government to handle critical issues such as stormwater? Given the past history of the city greenlighting development using false concurrency data, how am I to trust these tests now? Am I confident that you will enforce our environmental codes strictly? Again, I am very concerned that you're putting developer interests over our residents' concerns. This city needs an ombudsperson. To the City Council, I ask that you please act in unity to address the results of the test and to ensure subsequent actions are absolutely agenda-free and transparent. I'm actually disappointed that you didn't have a unified vote to say that, hey, this process needs to be revisited because it wasn't done on the up and up. You know, any elected official, I would think, would admit, right, that this needs some more transparency. So I was a little surprised about that vote. It is the ethical thing for you to do to revisit this. I don't want to hear, I'm not a traffic engineer. Well, I'm not either, but I'm a resident who elected you to stand up for me, to stand up for my community and for my home. Please do not treat this as a game where there are V3 winners and M4 losers. Do you really want the town center to go ahead under such a cloud? These actions will impact our community forever. This is not a game. This is our home. Please work hard together to win the trust and confidence of your residents and fight for us, not against each other. We shouldn't have to ask you to do this. To my fellow residents, whatever happens, we must stay vigilant. I'm glad you are all here and you showed up, taking time away from work and family. And I think many more would have been here if this meeting were held during non-work hours and not in August. Neighbors, as you can see from this divided council, we have some important decisions coming up to the city council elections. I'm hoping, but okay, and we have to continue to pay close attention to the current council too. For this reason, we've set up a Facebook page called Vote Sammamish. For that purpose, please join us. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I have Amy Barley.
It's going to be me again because she had to leave.
Ooh, I don't know.
Or Renee, can you read it, please?
I think someone else would need to read it.
Renee Bornfriend, 21530 Northeast Sammamish. I am speaking on behalf of Amy Barley, 20427 Northeast 41st Street. These are Amy's words, although they could be mine. I attended the meeting but had to leave early. I'm a 25-year resident of Sammamish. I love the city. I'm not against controlled growth, and I'm not inherently against the town center. I am against negatively impacting the quality of life in Sammamish. Our traffic is a problem, and adding more housing prior to a real actionable plan to improve safety and the commuter experience is not acceptable. I'm a realtor, and although it seems that people think all realtors are pro-development, I am not. I am pro-Sammamish. I work with people that want to purchase a home and are debating between Sammamish, Redmond, and Issaquah all the time. People are very concerned about commute times. If we add more housing without handling our infrastructure, our property values decrease. I also work with people leaving Sammamish because of all of our recent development. If I understand the numbers correctly, the phase 1 is 357 housing units. I can say with basic common sense that each housing unit will have at least one car, and most households in Sammamish have 2 or more cars. The city needs to represent the people of the city, not developers or investors. What's best for the city and our property values is to uphold our quality of life. I love Sammamish and don't mind change, but not change that reduces our quality of life. I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian Miller. Okay. Melanie Jacobs. Okay. And if there's anyone else that would like to address the council, I'd just ask that you kind of queue up along this wall here and go ahead. Anybody can go. Yeah, just form a line. And
hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Rudat Stevens. I live at 2120. Sorry, I forget. Sahali Drive East. And first of all, I want to thank staff, the consultant, city manager, attorney, and council for having this meeting, because I really believe so much in civic engagement being a top priority for the Americans, not just us in Sammamish. It's huge to me. Thank you. Especially thank you to staff and to the consultant for answering questions. I have to defend my dissertation, and we all have to defend our positions at some point, right? What I'd like to focus on here, though, is the barrier of entry to get more people within Sammamish involved. I think that a lot of acronyms are unintentionally used. I think that the content can be really overwhelming, and I would love to see a communications initiative that helps to inform and not overwhelm constituents so that they can be part of this conversation. I really don't think it's a silent group or a small group of people that have a lot of questions and get frustrated online. I talk to neighbors all the time. One stopped me in my driveway today, say, I would go to the meeting, but I don't get it. I just don't understand. So if we could try to do that, as well as, sidebar, focus on the fact that infrastructure is more than just traffic, I think that that would help me at least feel heard and help some of our neighbors too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Coombs, and thank you for holding this meeting today, and thank you for the city staff for also being here. I'm learning a lot today, and it's taken me a little bit to kind of understand what exactly happened. And
Jennifer, can we get your address?
Can you hear me?
Yes, address for the record, though.
Okay. And so I just want to be
Jennifer,
simple in
we need
kind
your
of what-
address for the
Is
record.
it away? Okay, thank
Thanks.
you. Sorry, I have a little bit of a hearing problem,
that's
so
okay.
I don't always hear. So am I okay at the level?
We just need your address for the
Oh, my
record.
address.
Address for the record, yes.
Okay. Can I tell you where I live so that way I don't have it memorized? I just moved. So I live in
Okay, you can let our city
the
clerk
Sam
know.
Apartments. Can someone look up that address?
We'll get it.
Okay. Sorry.
Just talk to our city clerk afterwards. It's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll try to be very simple here. Basically, what I noticed today was the biggest thing that happened was a miscommunication between city staff and the city council. And so what I thought was really helpful at the very end here is that we had a really good set of motions that were approved that might help prevent this from happening again. So thank you for passing those motions. But what I'm concerned about is what actually happened and what happened with the approvals and what we're going to be able to do about it from here. And so basically what I tried to look at was that the biggest issue was that the tip that was approved, from what I understand, created the issue. And so what's happening is that those projects that are on the tip is creating all of the issues with the development issues. And so the approved tip is what needs to go back to be looked at and reassessed and changed, because now we're possibly in a situation where there could be a lawsuit. And the only way to fix that is to go back and fix the actual tip that was approved, and you guys can do something like that. Now, from what I'm understanding, the biggest issue with the concurrency is the rush hour traffic that is moving through Salahi Way and a couple other issues that are moving through that are not accurate based on the modeling and the concurrency. Now, I talked about this on Facebook, but I thought I had to have some courage to actually speak to the council, so I decided to do that. And so the biggest issue, I said, if you're going to move forward, and you're going to have to move forward with these projects that have already been approved because you have no choice, one option would be to increase the amount of affordable housing that is in these developments. And I believe, from what I understand, that there's going to have to be some more collaboration and communication between the state authority, housing authority, to make that happen, because there's 10 to 14% of affordable housing currently, but there's a huge amount of blue-collar workers that work here that cannot afford to work here, including those who are working in the city hall. And so what I would like to see as an option before my 3 minutes is up is if there's an option for you guys to increase the amount of affordable housing that is being approved in Sammamish so that more of the blue-collar workers can actually live here and work here, thereby reducing the amount of rush hour traffic that is moving through and causing the concurrency issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Chris Gregson. I live at 2948 224th Place, Southeast. I wasn't able to make the beginning of the meeting. I think I'm kind of gathering what might have been discussed. So I have a list of prepared questions that I'll go through, but if I'm gathering correctly, it seems like we're talking about that there was a big confusion and miscommunication, and I just don't think that passes any kind of a sniff test from anybody that has any sort of a honest bone in their body. This is a big, big problem. It is a big, big concern of everybody in the city, and if you guys were truly on the same page and you were truly wanting to do the right thing, it would be common sense for anybody that was an honest person to call some sort of a meeting and talk about it before you did anything. Because everybody knows that this is a big concern and a big thing on everybody's mind. So it doesn't, if we're going with the line of a miscommunication, it doesn't fly. So my next question is, am I allowed to address only the council? Or can I address the planners?
So we can't really have a dialogue during public comment. So
that's fine.
Yeah.
So there's just a bunch of questions that I think everybody should think through, and I just want to state it to have it on the record. So when it was decided to award the concurrency certifications, was City Council notified ahead of approval for discussion? I think that's an important thing to know. Same question, was legal counsel notified ahead of approval? That would be important, and that would be a logical thing to do for anyone. The next thing I guess would be, and I guess nobody would probably answer it, maybe honestly, but was anybody notified ahead of time of approval? So the final question, or the last set of final questions are any of these communication types prohibited? Or is it simply that somebody didn't take it upon themselves to do what is common sense? And then the final thing is just to wrap it up so that you can know exactly how I view what happened. None of this passes any kind of sniff test. Not a sniff test for honesty, not a sniff test for a good person, not a good sniff test for integrity, and certainly not a sniff test for somebody that's in the business of serving the public need and an elected official from all of us. It just doesn't. So thank you for recording those questions.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Mary Wichter, and I live at 408 208th Avenue Northeast in Sammamish. I wanted to talk about critical areas because right now there is development going on in the most steeply hazardous areas in the city, quite a bit of it, and I wanted to, you hear from me a lot, I'm going to be reading mostly from the Department of Commerce is implementing the GMA, and they have updated it, particularly the Critical Areas Handbook, so I'm going to be reading some things from that to share with you. All jurisdictions are required to protect environmentally critical areas and conserve resource lands and forests. Even counties who exercise and opt out of GMA full planning are still subject to critical areas planning. The GMA does call cities and counties to review and, as necessary, revise plans and regulations to ensure that they remain up to date. Critical areas include areas and ecosystems. Geologically hazardous areas are included as well. These are areas that are susceptible to erosion, sliding or landslides, earthquakes, and other geological events. They may not be suited to siting of commercial, industrial, or residential development to be consistent with public health and safety concerns. In fact, the Growth Management Act, there's a Growth Management Hearings Board that when things are challenged, they make decisions. And the Western Washington Growth Management Hearings Board views the GMA as effectively establishing two categories of critical areas. Those whose functions and values are protected for beneficial services they provide, such things as wetlands, aquifer recharge areas, and they don't list it here, but probably stream areas. The second category of those areas is for which protection is needed due to the threat that these areas pose to persons and property. These would include places that are frequently flooded and geologically hazardous areas. And there's numerous goals and policies which exist in our comprehensive plan under the Environment and Conservation that you have to identify critical areas, wildlife and pollinator habitat conservation areas, slopes subject to mass movement, slopes with a grade of 40% or more, landslide, erosion, or seismic hazard areas, and regulated buffers. And that the city is, another policy in environment conservation is to maintain effective enforcement of cities' environmental critical areas and code requirements in its rules and regulations and to evaluate their effectiveness of compliance periodically. There's one big goal. It says protect people, property, and the environment in areas of natural hazards. You're supposed to avoid and minimize impacts from new development to erosion hazard areas and landslide hazard areas subject to provisions of the Development Code, and periodically assess their effectiveness. You're supposed to avoid potential impacts to life and property by strictly limiting land disturbance and development in landslide hazards, steep slopes, and erosion overlays. And there's a little bit on seismic as well. You're also to support the inventory of existing on-site septic tank and drain field systems. We have almost 3,500 of those left in the city. You're supposed to educate people, look for septic systems, and strive to have no significant increase in fecal coliform bacteria. Anyway, I have submitted docket items. There are also Stormwater Code amendments coming up September 3rd, and the Zachary Basin Plan. I think it's on the consent agenda for the next one, but I think that should be discussed as well because these are super important and they've got to be done.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. I guess I'm the last one standing between you and your pizza and maybe a glass of wine, so I'll try to be brief. I found tonight very interesting. I also find it incredible that after so many town center concurrency tests, we now have a test that passes. And it passes because of a couple of things. First of all, Sahalee Way was included, even though it is far from being approved by the council. It's far from being designed to the point where we know what we're getting, and certainly hasn't been funded. The traffic stuff we talked about today with traffic leaving town center area to go south on 212th brings up another point. That's making use of two additional roads, 218th and Southeast 8th, which are also on the TIP and certainly haven't even begun a design process yet. So I'm sure that that is something else that the council may want to think about in the future as well. The number of trips generated by the housing area in question, to me, is a little suspect. I spent a lot of time in my airline business working with MIT on modeling. I've got 2 decades of traffic analysis in that area. So I kind of have a feel for things. Also, how things can be manipulated to achieve a desired result. There's no way that so many additional residences are going to generate so little additional traffic either within our city or outside of it. In reality, it's going to be much more. Apartments and condos, traffic generation numbers in Sammamish will be higher than they are nationally. So reliance on the ITE manual is one area I would look at in things. What this whole process has reminded me of is thinking of it from the standpoint of someone on the outside looking in, is are we back to the days of the city approving development willy-nilly? And I hope we're not. But if we are, that's going to result in a significant erosion on the part of the city residents and the council. I think I totally agree with the idea presented by Deputy Mayor Moran that we have somebody on the outside come in and do a deep dive into the model. And I think, Karen, probably should be deeper than you're talking about here. It's high time for the council to bring in that sort of expertise. Equally disturbing to me when I read about this whole situation is how this unwrapped. Nobody on the council, and I understand, including the city manager, knew this was coming. For this to go out without the apparent knowledge of you guys is extremely disturbing and would not have been permitted in any organization that I've ever been associated with in the past, either civilian or military. It's a failure of command and management control. The total surprise here indicates that there's yet a second major issue that needs to be addressed by this council. Thank you very much. By the way, my name is Tom O'Dell. My address is 2831 220th Place Northeast, 30 years in Sammamish. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give one last call for anyone else that would like to address the council this evening. Okay, seeing none, I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed? All right, we are adjourned.